Okay, so listeners, welcome to this, episode of Shorts, as we call it, short, sharp conversations on different topics within HR and about talent and careers. I have with me a very special guest, Vidya Kumar. Vidya is the CHRO of Besdorf, and most of you may not know the company, but you'll know their brands like Nivea, etc. So, Vidya, welcome.
Thank you, Bimal, and a very good afternoon to you. Thanks for having this conversation with me.
So we're going to have a conversation about women's careers in a broad sense, but Vidya and me have agreed that the more personal side she can share, it would be that much more beneficial to our listeners, and therefore we're really going to have a conversation about Vidya's own career and how she's felt about her career going up as a woman. So Vidya, let me just kick off straight and ask you, you know, maybe if you can describe your career journey a little bit and and also, do you see that there are any differences? If you were a man, for example, would it have been any different for you?
Yeah, so thanks, Bimal. Look, if I think back over my career, over say let's say the last 17 years or so, I have to say there hasn't been as much planning as one would imagine.
Hmm.
When we talk to younger people today, you hear a lot about what I'll do in the next 3 years, I'll do this much in the next 5 years, and so on. I have to say I've been guided very often by either my own managers or my mentors, or sometimes by personal choices that I've made over a period of time.
Right.
There are probably one or two occasions where I've chosen to plan my steps. I started with a pharma company in Ahmedabad. Felt the need to expand my horizon, work with a larger brand, much like many management trainees at that stage,
Right.
and then took up that opportunity to move with a large IT services organization. Gained experience of scale and really just the whole gamut of HR processes and
Hmm.
systems, uh, which was a conscious move, right, to be able to
Right.
do that. Uh, and then, there was a personal life stage, in the sense that I got married, and my husband was at the time moving to Delhi, and
Right.
so that forced me to make a choice, also to say, okay, I don't think we want to do a long distance thing, so let's try and find a way to be together. And so
Right.
that was a personal choice I made, to be in Delhi at the time.
Hmm.
And so a couple of things happened over there. Took on another role then, which according to me aligned, with the organization's values, and
Hmm.
at the
Hmm.
same time, I felt that the role expanded my horizons.
Right.
Um, I also remember making a short-term decision at the time, initially, about choosing a workplace based on the distance from my home.
Hmm.
Um, and I mentioned that because I think we make those choices, and I don't think it was the smartest thing to do at the time,
Hmm.
but it was something that I did, and came to realize that perhaps when you think about career choices, there are bigger things at play there.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and then, again, subsequently, I had an opportunity which took me to Mumbai. And, at the time, my husband decided that, look, you know what, I'll follow you. If this
Right.
is a bigger opportunity, better experience, let's move to Bombay, and we'll figure things out.
Hmm.
And so that happened, sometime in 2009. I've been in Bombay since. Again, gained new experiences within the same organization.
Right.
And then, over a period of time, what happened was that we decided to make a choice to build our life in Bombay. A
Right.
child happened, and
Right.
my husband's freelance career was taking off, and we felt that Bombay was the place to be. Whereas the organization I was with didn't have further options for me to grow from
Hmm.
while we were in Bombay. So then I made a choice to move to an organization which was headquartered in the city, and
Right.
therefore offered a more gamut of opportunities. Again, a personal choice guided that decision. Then I spent more than 7 years at that company, and again, was benefited by several experiences while I
Hmm.
was there.
Hmm. Hmm.
Some of those experiences included having, doing global regional roles, but continuing to be in Mumbai. Again, a
Right.
personal choice that I wanted to be in Mumbai, but yet experience the full scale
Hmm.
and the
Hmm.
exposure
Hmm.
that a multinational company can give you. So that was fantastic. I think the other sort of turning point was, somewhere around 15 years into my career, I felt
Hmm.
that, as an HR professional, one of the key experiences I had missed all this while was, being in a factory.
Right.
And I the stage that I was in, I felt like if I needed to at some point head HR for a
Mm,
business, that's
mm,
an experience that is absolutely necessary, and it
right.
orients you very differently. And I also spoke to my mentors at the time to talk about that. And again, the organization was nice enough to work that out in a way that it
Mm,
suited both my personal circumstances to continue to be based in Bombay, but support a
right.
factory which was based somewhere else. So I used to travel,
Mm, mm,
every alternate week, spend time there and then spend time here. So that was again perhaps a slightly more planned decision.
mm, mm,
After that, I took on another big role within the organization, the same organization, and then felt the need to take a break. Again, I don't know if to come back to your question about whether my gender influenced some of these choices.
right.
I'd like to pause and talk about the break specifically, because I
Mm,
don't think I took the break because I had a role to play as a mother or as a wife, but I took a break because I felt the need to take a break and
mm,
step back and sort of reevaluate my priorities. Also plan the next phase of my career. One can call it a midlife crisis
mm.
or what you will,
Yeah, yeah,
uh, but something told me that I needed to take a pause,
right.
and so I did that, and took almost 4 months off. Just I think, like I said, reevaluating what I
Mm,
wanted to
mm,
do,
mm,
and having a few conversations with people I trusted, and then made also the choice to come back,
right.
and
Right.
then took on the job that I currently do, which is to head HR for a large company. So yes, that's been my journey, Bimal, and I again call out and say that I think there were places at which I planned, not
Mm,
too many,
right.
but a few places that I planned. In some places, I was guided by a mentor or a manager who saw the potential in me to do something which I
Right.
perhaps hadn't thought of.
Mm,
And in some other places, it was guided by a personal life stage which required me to make a choice.
right.
Uh, and I think, if you ask me, that's gender agnostic.
Right.
Many of those choices I would see men make, if they're
Mm,
brave enough, to make those choices,
mm,
and say that, look, this is what I need for my career and for also for my life.
right. Right.
So that's how I would see it, Bimal.
But if I delve a little bit into two aspects, they are a little bit, so it looks like it's almost like a mix of, a choice around experiences, a choice around life stages, a choice
Yes,
around, your own personal needs, for example, of taking a break and, stepping
absolutely.
back and all
Yeah,
that. And also, like you said, there are some parts where you don't really plan, you just sort of go ahead kind of a
yeah,
thing.
yes,
So if you look back now, now that you are in a CXO position
sure.
and, you've done well, through your career, would you do it any differently? Or do you think that this is the way, which is actually a nice way to go through life and career in a way?
Yeah. Bimal, I'm firmly in the camp that your career is your own. To try and sort of templatize it based on what someone else is doing is I think the chances of you walking away feeling unhappy are very high, right?
Right.
Because your life is your own, your circumstances are your own, your context is your own. So, um, having said that, there are places where I feel like if I had planned something earlier, when the variables in my life were fewer, right?
Right.
Now, later on in your life and your career, there are more variables to consider,
Right.
particularly in your personal context, right?
Mm.
So, if there are things that you could plan earlier when the variables are fewer, that can really make a big difference. So, as an example, what I said about working in a factory,
Mm.
I did that 15 years into my career.
Right.
Was that something that I could have planned for earlier and sort it out? And I think that's one thing I would absolutely urge anyone who seeks out any sort of counsel, is that uh, be your own advocate.
Right.
Reach out and seek those opportunities which will push you out of your comfort zone, which will give you those experiences that you need later on in your career.
Correct.
So I think that's something that I would have perhaps done differently,
Mm.
to
Mm.
seek out those experiences early on, when I knew I had fewer variables to manage,
Yes.
perhaps. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting you say that, because, for example, if I take the factory example,
Yes.
uh, in other conversations like this, very often, women leaders have said that, I wanted to do this, but the environment didn't really support me, kind of a thing, particularly things like factories and
Right.
certain particular jobs and so on and so forth. So while what you're saying is right, I would also, in a way, bring in a dose of reality there, saying that,
Of course.
not all opportunities are always, practical, even though women leaders may want to do them early in their career.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I agree, and I would add that I was fortunate in terms of having a set of managers and a set of sponsors and mentors who said, like, look, this is an experience that we believe will benefit Vidya,
Right,
and equally add value to the organization. So
right,
let's figure out what it will take to make it happen, right?
correct,
Which is
correct.
in that, okay, she can't relocate, but here's what we can do. Can
And
she travel and be there 50% of the time and make it happen? Or for
correct.
example, if I'm doing a regional role, which requires me to work across multiple time zones and so on, can she still do it while she's in Bombay instead of having
Mm,
to be there all the time, right? And with a
right.
certain amount of travel,
Mm,
I think you do need the environment, the right sponsors to enable making that happen. uh, Equally, I think that the individual needs to walk half the distance, right?
absolutely,
If you sit
absolutely.
back and say that, look, I'm not mobile, now make it work for me. I'm
Mm,
not going to do anything beyond what I'm prepared to do. So I think it's a little bit of walking the distance and
both.
meeting
Yeah,
yourself
yeah, yeah.
halfway there. Yeah.
No, that's a great point. So Vidya, if I, on a different note, let's say, if you go back to the early parts of your career, if you were to give, let's say, almost tips to somebody and say, keep these two or three things in mind in the early stages of your career, what would those two, three things be, particularly for women?
Sure. Yeah, I think, Vimal, again, I'll go back to the point I made earlier first, right? That plan what you can, right?
Mm, mm,
So if you know that there are certain things that you'd like to do, gain experiences of, by all means seek them out, right?
right,
But equally, keep yourself flexible. That early on in your career, there's only so much life experience that you have, right? And
right.
therefore, your ability to know what a certain experience can give you is limited to that extent.
That's a
So
great
be
point.
flexible to what people around you, or at least people that you trust, are
Right,
offering you to say that, look, this is how you could potentially gain a different kind of experience. So
correct.
I think that flexibility helps. I think a strong willingness to be out there, and that willingness to learn is very important.
Mm,
And again, I these are not tips I'm offering to say just for women. I think it
sure,
would
right,
apply really
yeah,
to anyone, but
right.
I think the point about the sort of planning but also remaining flexible
Mm,
perhaps holds more true for women. Given in a cultural context such as ours, we do find ourselves sometimes later on in our life stage, uh, you know, uh, suddenly sort of buffeted by multiple other conditions which are not
yeah,
entirely in our control, and
correct, correct.
therefore having sort of, when you can control a few things, try and do it when you can, right?
Absolutely.
And then at the same time look at what you can give, what's negotiable, what's not negotiable.
Right,
I
right.
think that's important.
Mm,
uh, Early on in your career, I think this is what I would do. But
right,
if I can preempt your question in terms of mid career, as you sort of
right. Yeah, the later part of your career,
yeah,
as you
I
grow more senior.
yeah, I think to be prepared to seek support. It's not easy, right? And not for a man, not for a woman these days, because I think all of us are juggling multiple responsibilities. So I think seeking support and being prepared to be vulnerable and share
Mm,
that vulnerability
right,
also makes a big difference. I
right.
think I've always been amazed by how much support is out there if you're willing to ask for that help.
Mm, mm,
And I mean that not just in the personal space, right? Which is, of course, from your family, from
right,
domestic
right.
staff, from your spouse, of course. Far too often I see younger members in the organization talk about the fact that I can't do this because my I have to take care of the child, and
Mm,
I
mm,
can't do this and I can't do that. But have you considered saying to your spouse or to your mother or your mother-in-law or your father-in-law for that matter, that look, I need this time because this is the time that I dedicate for my career. Can you help me with this or that? And
Mm.
being assertive about it. So seeking that support, I think, is very important. In the professional space, again, I think very often, and perhaps again this is years of conditioning, and also sometimes it's peer pressure when you see somebody who's sort of out there and available all the time, and
Right.
sort of driving their careers, and sort of all these lists don't help, right? 40 under 40 and all of
Correct.
those things, you
Correct.
see your peers doing something. I think sometimes we forget that it's okay, pace your career based on what
Mm.
suits you the most.
Correct. Correct.
And therefore, in that, seek the support. I think, particularly what I find in India is we're not very good at sort of saying that, look, you know what, at this stage, I would like my pace so my trajectory to be a certain way.
Right.
And, in 12 months' time or in 18 months' time, I'm happy to sort of take that steep learning
Correct.
curve and do something which is more
Correct.
challenging.
Correct.
And I think that's something that's I believe organizations also have to mature for that.
Right.
But culturally, we're not conditioned to sort of say
Mm.
that, look, I need to slow down and I need help here, or I'd like to take on this project, but I don't want to take this on because I don't think now is the time for it. I will take this, I can take on something like that in 12 months'
Well,
time.
that's a great point, Vidya, you make, because I think, very often, and at least in my experience, I would say that, people almost bottle it inside. So they will keep saying that I am not getting help. And very often they would, in a way, uh, talk to themselves,
Yeah.
but they would not talk to, people around them or ask for help. And, and like you said, perhaps it's a little more difficult for women in my experience, but it is equally true for men. It's not, in fact, sometimes it is perhaps even more true for men because
I agree.
they like to think of themselves in a particular way. So so it's
Yes.
even more difficult for them to ask for help.
Absolutely.
But certainly I agree to that. So let me go to a different point. You talked about Vidya, and you mentioned it 2 or 3 times in different ways, right? So, and you mentioned mentorship and sponsorship, but I'm going to talk specifically about mentorship. And what have you gained out of mentorship? Of course, you talked about it earlier, but if you were to advocate, women leaders particularly saying, find a mentor or mentors and you work with them, what kind of things would you say?
uh, Bimal, I completely, at the cost of repetition, I'd say that, having a mentor makes such a big difference. And this is not about, defining the role of a mentor, saying, this is my responsibility, this is the mentor's responsibility, the organization needs to find me a mentor, and so on. Ultimately, a mentor is someone that you trust, who
Right.
equally, feels a trust with you, is invested in you in a positive, constructive way, is able to show you the mirror, ultimately, right? And if you're able to find that person among your peers, among someone who you reported to, or someone else in within
Correct.
the organization, outside the organization, I think it can really play a part. I do believe that, very often, particularly when I've personally set up mentoring programs, or experienced mentoring myself or been a mentor myself, I've seen it work best when both sides are invested in it.
Right.
It doesn't work when the organization puts a plan in place and then says, look, here are 10 women you need to now be mentored, and here are your mentors,
Mm,
and
mm,
go
mm.
forth and conquer the world. I don't think it works like that. I think you need to want to be mentored firstly.
Right.
Be prepared to seek. Again, I think it's about seeking help, right? In a
Right.
way,
Right.
it's about seeking help. It's about seeking counsel. It's about also being prepared to then hear the feedback and see if you're willing to do something
Makes
about it,
sense. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Uh, I've very often I have trusted in my managers as mentors,
Mm,
because
mm.
I believe they fulfill all of those conditions, right? That
Right.
they trust me, I trust them, they're invested in my success, they
Mm.
believe that I have something more than I can see myself. So
Right.
I think those things make a big difference. So I've not actively gone out seeking a mentor. Very
Mm.
often my mentors have been people that I have worked with, and I've trusted, and I've seen them show trust in me and investment
Right.
in me. And those are the people who I've always reached out to. It's not even something that we've agreed on to say I'll do an hour every
Mm,
month
mm,
and
mm.
things like that. It's actually about saying, we'll stay connected, and if I know that if I need to reach out and seek their counsel, they're available.
Just pick up the phone and talk to them, kind of thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's been incredibly valuable at different stages in my career.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think that's an important one because I think at least certainly, I think people still look at, a lot of people look at mentoring as a very structured kind of a process.
Yeah,
But I see what you're saying, which is that as long as there's a desire and there's a trust, I think those are the two sort of almost preconditions, if you will.
absolutely.
And you can still make it work, and you can have multiple mentors across, and depending on who you just pick up the phone and talk to,
That's right.
kind of thing. And yeah, that's a good one, this thing. So is there Vidya, on a, as we come towards the end of this conversation, I think two specific things, and then I have a last question to ask you. It appears to me from whatever you've described so far that you've had fairly good set of sponsors and mentors. And obviously, like you said, in our colloquial way, we say that you can't clap with one hand, so you have a contribution to that as well, right? Because you've had the desire and seeking out and all
Right.
that sort of stuff. But are there one or two watch outs or bottlenecks, you would say,
Yeah.
which people should watch out for, particularly women leaders? Is it, what should they be careful about, if you will?
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I don't think what I'm going to say is rocket science or hasn't been said before, Bimal. But this is, from my personal experience, I think a couple of watchouts I'd say are, the sort of much talked about imposter syndrome, right? Again,
Mm,
not
mm.
unique to women. I think both genders
Correct.
can be affected by it. Uh, but I think I've personally gone through phases where I've considered, or second guessed myself to say, am I good enough to do this?
Mm, mm.
Why is someone else asking me to do this? Maybe they don't know,
Correct.
I'll be found out in picking up something so big. I think that's a big watch out. And that's where, again, seeking feedback helps. And then it's not about seeking validation, but it's actually about speaking to multiple people,
Mm,
right? And
mm.
so you speak not just to one person, but you
Correct.
get that feedback from across. Having a great manager certainly helps, because then
Helps. Yeah.
they'll show you the mirror, right? They have no reason to not tell you what's right or wrong. So I think that is a watch out. And so finding ways in your own personal and professional life to counter that is something that
Mm,
I believe is important. The other one, perhaps, which is linked, is advocacy, and so your own advocacy for yourself. And
mm,
I remember
mm,
one of my managers saying this to me, that uh, you have to be your own advocate. No one else is going to advocate for you better than yourself.
mm.
And again, not something that too many women are good at, I'd say.
Right. Right.
Again, it's not, I mean, at the end of the day, I don't want to stereotype, but I think it's sometimes something that we can fall prey to. um, but to really make the effort to know where you stand, right, what your
Mm,
strengths
mm,
are,
mm,
and
mm.
equally be aware of what where your development areas are,
Right. Right.
and being able to advocate for yourself, being mindful of what your personal context is. I think, and again, this holds true for both men and women, but I say this to yeah, especially people sort of early on in their career very often, that be mindful that your career doesn't exist in a bubble. It exists
Mm.
in the context of your life, right? And
Right.
therefore, uh, keep in mind what that context is and how that evolves over a period of time. At the
Correct.
same time, see what you can do with your career in that context, right?
Right.
So
Right.
I think, advocate for yourself, knowing what your choices are and what your
Mm,
context
mm,
is.
mm.
um, and that's important. I've found myself wanting in that, and I've had people, thankfully, who've sort of nudged me and said, you know what, I think you're selling yourself short. You
Sure. Mm.
should be advocating for yourself. So I think that's again a watch out to be mindful of.
Right. Right. So Vidya, you've said this in many different ways, but as I work with a lot of people, at leadership levels, I think I like to put that in a fairly simple way, saying, don't try to be somebody else. And, you talked about the imposter syndrome and, your own context and, personalizing that context and so on and so forth. And I think that's very true, in the sense that if you try to be somebody else and imitate somebody else and somebody else's journey,
Yes.
chances are that you'll fall flat a little bit, kind of a thing. So last question, Vidya, if you obviously, like we said, had a lot of support and mentors and so on and so forth. Maybe you can tell us a story about a specific support you got or you would have liked if you didn't get it, which has made you what you are in a way, or something which, you would advocate, saying, if this kind of support can be provided to women, they would perhaps, flower much more.
Yeah. Bimal, I'd probably take two, if I may.
Sure.
One is on the personal side, right? And I believe that you need that support, both professionally and personally,
Sure.
to really make things happen for yourself. And I'd say that my husband and the choices that we've made jointly as a unit have
Right.
played a big part in enabling me to make certain professional choices,
Absolutely.
whether it was to, let's say, relocate to a different city to enable me to gain a certain new experience,
Correct.
or it was to say that, look, there's a certain type of role which will require a certain degree of travel, and my daughter was already at a certain age, and therefore there were responsibilities
Right.
associated with
Right.
her. So for him to have to play a bigger role during that 12, 15 months that I was going to be away from that much longer, I think those were decisions that were made jointly, knowing fully what the pitfalls were,
Right.
right? And therefore, I say that was a huge support. I mean, and my husband says this to me all the time, that it was give and take, right? There were obviously additional responsibilities that I would have had to take on because of that,
Correct.
I both professionally but also at home in the time that I was available. Um, and then we made a choice that, look, we will continue in Bombay because that also serves his career,
Correct.
and we
Correct.
don't. So there's a little bit of quid pro quo, like in any other relationship that you would have. But being able to make those decisions jointly as a unit, I think, is important,
Right.
and being aware of what the sort of trade-offs are
Correct.
in the long run, right?
Mm.
Uh, Professionally, I'd say the support that I've got, particularly through mentors, I'd call out the decision I made, one, to take the factory role,
Right.
right?
Right.
I had a skip level manager who, with whom I had a really trusting relationship, and he spoke to me about it, and he said, look, there is going to be hardship involved in
Mm.
this, right?
Mm.
Because you're going to be traveling, you're going to be away from the family 50% of the time. It is a new environment. You're going into this quite late in your career. You're going to go in there as a leader who's expected to know everything, but you wouldn't know anything, right?
Mm.
Because you are stepping into this space for the first time. And those conversations really helped guide that decision. Second, about I think 18 months later is when I chose to take the pause in my career and take that time off. Again, while the organization again was very nice to offer me different options to consider at the time, equally, once I made the decision and made it clear that, look, I really think I want to do it, I have concerns, I am nervous about it because I've never taken a break.
Yeah.
Another mentor at the time, who was the head of the business, he said that, look, now that you've made the decision, back yourself.
Mm.
You've built your credibility over a 15-year period. This is the time to cash in on it. At the end of 4 months, 6 months, you want to get back into the corporate world, you should know that you should back yourself to say that opportunities will be available. And that made such a big difference, Bimal. At the time, I could have easily sort of, had nervous pangs at the last minute and said, you know
Correct.
what, I don't think I can do this, and let me just step back in.
Right.
But again, having someone sort of, give me that vote of confidence to say back yourself,
Yeah.
again, made a big difference. So I think that, to your point, Bimal, man or woman, you need that confidence, that
Right.
mentorship, at different points in your career,
Correct. Correct.
and make yourself available for that. Seek it
Mm.
out when you need to.
Right. Right. No, great, Vidya. Thank you very much. This has been a lovely conversation, and as usual, it's great talking to you. So, thank you very much for this. I'm sure our listeners will really, really enjoy this conversation. I think some great insights, and from my perspective, I think also some interesting balance among different things you've talked about. And what I loved about this conversation was that it's very personal in that sense. It's not what I would call esoteric or theoretical, right? So to that extent, so thank you, Vidya. Thank you very much for this conversation.
Enjoyed it very much. Thank you, Bimal.